Hello and welcome to All Top 5s. The classic fairy tale is a short story originating in folklore. It often features fantastical elements such as magic, talking animals, and evil beings. In more recent centuries, fairy tales have been perceived mainly as children's stories, but perhaps some of the darker examples should be reconsidered. They're definitely not suitable for kids. Number 5. The Juniper Tree. An old one from the collections of the Brothers Grimm here, full of violence and jealousy. A couple, desperate for a baby, pray every day for a child, the wife doing so under her favourite juniper tree. Eventually, she falls pregnant, but she becomes very ill from eating too many juniper berries and requests that her husband bury her beneath the juniper tree when she dies. A baby is born, white as snow and red as blood, and the new mother dies of happiness. The father buries his wife beneath the tree. The boy's father remarries and has a daughter with this new wife. This stepmother hates the boy and only loves her own daughter, so she abuses him constantly. The stepmother decides to lure the boy to a chest full of apples. She permits him to reach in and grab an apple, and she slams the chest's lid down, decapitating him. The stepmother then bandages the boy's head back onto his body and sits him in a chair outside, holding an apple. And as if that's not grotesque enough, the dead boy's stepsister hits him when he won't give her his apple, and his head rolls off. The girl cries for a whole day, and the stepmother then chops up the boy's body and cooks him into a blood soup. She then feeds it to the boy's father, her husband. Afterwards, the stepmother buries the boy's bones under that same juniper tree. Straight away, out of a ghostly mist, a beautiful bird flies out and sings around the town about its horrific murder, and that it was the stepmother who carried out the deed. The townspeople give the bird some gifts, including a millstone. The bird, turning out to be the murdered boy, drops the millstone on his stepmother's head and crushes her skull, instantly killing her. The son is back and lives happily ever after with his father and stepsister. While the almost comical ending of a heavy stone being dropped by a bird on the villain's head is something we've all heard before, of course, the rest is grim, pardon the pun. Decapitation, followed by that scene with the dead body propped on a chair, and then the butchering of his corpse and forced cannibalism, it's all a horrific nightmare. Number 4. Cinderella. This is one of the best known fairy tales, but the older Grimm version was far darker than any modern day Disney variety. On the whole, the story is the same, but there are some differences. There's a girl called Cinderella, actually it's Aschenputtel, meaning ash fool in the original German, who gets grief from her stepsisters and prays every day for a better life. The king organises a festival and invites all the beautiful maidens in the land to attend so that he might find his son, the prince, a bride. Aschenputtel's sisters fight with her over this and try to stop her from going. She manages to find a magical dove that comes to her mother's grave where she planted a hazel tree, and wishes it to clothe her in beautiful, rich clothes. She attends the festival, and the prince falls for her, but she has to leave before sunset each day. On the third day, she leaves her golden slipper behind. The prince searches the land for the maiden whose foot fits this slipper, including Aschenputtel's house, where her stepsisters are desperate to squeeze their feet in. Now this is where it gets a little bit dark. Rather than simply trying to push their feet in, like the Disney version, the stepsisters follow their mother's advice. The eldest sister slices off all her toes to fit into the slipper. The prince, fooled at first, notices the blood and realises the deception. The other stepsister, at her mother's command, cuts off part of her heel instead. Again, the prince notices and rejects the girl. Finally, Aschenputtel's foot fits perfectly, and they get married and they'll all live happily ever after. Except for in the second edition of this tale. In this version, as Aschenputtel walks down the aisle at her wedding, the doves who helped her before fly down and peck out one eye from each of the stepsisters. The wedding continues with them bleeding from their faces, and as Aschenputtel and her prince leave the church, the doves come back down and finish off the task, removing the second eye from each stepsister. Why the Brothers Grimm decided to add this gory punishment in as a coda to the happily ever after, I really don't know. Number 3. Donkey Skin. And now for a really weird one. This was written in France in 1695 by Charles Perrault, author of Cinderella, Little Red Riding Hood, and Sleeping Beauty. There lived in a castle a king with a beautiful wife. They had a donkey who defecated gold and was the source of their immense wealth. After his wife died, the king was desperate to find one as beautiful as her again. He couldn't, and instead creepily chose his daughter to be his next bride. The daughter clearly wasn't happy about this and made a deal with her fairy godmother to get out of the marriage. She demanded a dress as bright as the sun, a dress of colours of the moon, and a dress of all the colours of the sky, and the skin of the king's magical gold-pooing donkey. She thought the king, her father, would give up as a result of this, but he didn't, and instead gave her all she asked for, including that donkey's hide. The princess then wore the donkey skin and ran away to live out her new ugly life on a farm, now known as Donkey Skin. A prince passing by noticed her wearing one of her beautiful dresses one day for a feast and immediately became obsessed with her. In fact, he was so in love with her, he actually became ill and decided that the only thing to cure him would be a cake baked by Donkey Skin. Donkey Skin agreed to make this cake to return the prince to health, but one of her rings fell in. The prince ate the cake, found the ring, and insisted on marrying the girl to whom it belonged. She got rid of the filthy donkey hide, wore a fine gown, and married the prince. They later found that the insane, incestuous creep of a king had remarried anyway, so everyone conveniently lived happily ever after. And that's that. I told you it would be a weird one. Number 2. The Goose Girl. Now back to the good old Brothers Grimm. The Goose Girl is a common tale, but with some dark twists and turns. In this one, a king has died, and the widowed queen sends her daughter away to be married. She goes with her magical talking horse, a servant maid, and a special protective necklace from the queen. On their travels, the princess loses her protective charm in a stream, and the maid now decides to refuse her every command. Now the wicked maid has nothing stopping her, she switches clothes and horses with the princess, taking her place and threatening to kill her if she ever tells anyone. When they arrive at the faraway palace, the maid is welcomed as a princess, and the real princess is ordered to guard the geese. Because the princess's horse can talk, the evil maid has him killed and nails his head above the poor princess's living quarters. Conrad, the boy who watches the geese with the deposed princess, becomes infatuated and steals a lock of her beautiful golden hair. She catches him and puts a spell on him so that his hat flies away. Understandably, Conrad complains to the king about this sorcery, and the king orders the Goose Girl princess to explain herself. Fearing for her life because of the evil servant girl in disguise who cut off a horse's head, the princess agrees to tell her story from the inside of an iron stove for some reason. Maybe she thought it was like a confession box. The king overhears anyway and discovers the treachery of the servant girl. And now for the really dark bit, that girl's punishment. The king, being a sneaky king, asks the servant girl, hypothetically, what she'd consider a suitable punishment for the crime of threatening to kill a princess and switching places with her. Unbelievably stupidly, the girl doesn't realise she's being set up and states that a false servant should be dragged by horses through town naked in a barrel stuck on the inside with hundreds of spikes. And that's exactly what the king decides to do to her until she dies slowly and horribly. But of course everyone else lives happily ever after, haha! Number 1. The Old Woman Who Was Skinned Alive. Now the title of this one speaks for itself really. Some 200 years before the Brothers Grimm even came along, this tale was published as an anthology of stories within a story called the Pentamerone. That overarching story is bad enough in itself, with adultery, forced marriages, and threats of unborn child crushing. Yes, that's right. But this mini tale within a tale takes the cake for gratuitous violence. There were once two very old sisters who lived near the king's palace and decided to try and seduce him. Their bodies were terribly ugly and old, but their singing voices still held youth and beauty. They sang as the king walked by their residence one day, and, as most kings in these tales, he immediately became obsessed with the women inside the building. He begged and begged to meet them, but they would only show him a single finger covered in grease to make it soft, through the keyhole of their door. He needed more though, and the eldest sister agreed to meet with him at night in the dark. To make her skin feel younger and slimmer, she used pins to hold it back like rolls of fabric. But the king was able to feel this and became outraged at this deception. He flung her out of the window, and she was caught on the branches of a tree by her loose, flapping skin. Luckily though, a bunch of fairies was passing by, and for some reason they turned her back into a young, beautiful woman. The king found her the next day and thought it to be a totally different person, so married her immediately, of course. The other, older sister though, at the wedding, was consumed with jealousy and demanded to know how her sister had become so young and beautiful again. She lied, replying that she had removed her old skin and revealed her beauty hidden underneath. The younger sister fell for this, so she went to a barber and demanded that he remove all her skin. The barber, paid handsomely, then spent the day removing all of the old woman's skin with his scissors and razors. Of course, that evening, the woman died, having been, slowly flayed alive. And for once, no one actually lived happily ever after. The older sister was skinned to death, the king grew bored of his new wife, and the new queen missed her sister, living the rest of her lonely life in misery. Well, I can't wait to tell that one to my children at bedtime. And that's it from all top 5s for this week. Please remember to be civil and polite when posting comments, and if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like. Hit the subscribe button for notifications of all my new videos. So peace and love to each and every one of you, and I'll see you all next time on All Top 5s.